Before we talk about how the light reaction and photosynthesis works, it's important for us to learn the properties of light. Light is a form of electromagnetic radiation. You can think of it as small particles that carry energy. And different types of electromagnetic radiation carry different amounts of energy. And electromagnetic radiation travels through space in a wave form, as you can see in here. Like if you've ever seen ripples of water on a pond when you throw a stone, that's kind of something similar to that. So as light travels from one place to another, it kind of follows a wavy path. Now there are different types of names in here that we need to remember. So when the different positions in the pathway that electromagnetic radiation, in this case light, follows, different parts of it have different names. So the top part is called crest and the bottom part is called trough. And then the distance between the crest of the first wave and the crest of the wave that comes after it is called wavelength. Now, wavelength is a measure of how much energy in electromagnetic radiation carries. The type of electromagnetic radiation that has a lot of energy, you're going to get a lot of different waves in a short amount of time. I'll show you a simulation later to see what it looks like. Now, the type of electromagnetic radiation that don't pack a lot of energy, their waves are further apart. It's kind of in this drawing, which a student of mine from previous semesters has drawn, it's kind of an analogy for you to visualize it. So think about sea in two different conditions. A sea or ocean that exists in really stormy weather and a calm sea. In a stormy weather, you're going to see a lot of waves that are quite close to one another. It's because in stormy weather, the weather system carries a lot of energy in it. But when the sea is calm, the waves are few and far between, and they are quite far apart. So going back to the concept of wavelength, the larger the wavelength, the lower the energy an electromagnetic radiation has. And the shorter the wavelength, the higher energy it packs, just like this wave. When the wavelength is short, the distance between the crest of these waves, there's more energy. It's a more violent sea. But in a more calm sea, the distance between the crests are far, so it packs less energy. Now let's take a look at this simulation. So I'm going to play around with these controls, and I want you to take a look at wavelength here. And this, as I change this, you can see the wavelength change, and take a look at the wave in here and how it travels. So here's a particular electromagnetic radiation. You see that these particles of, if you want, light are moving through the space. Now, when I'm going to decrease the wavelength, take a look, it's 306. Now I'm increasing it to 115. And you can see that these crests are much closer together. There's much more energy packed into this wave. And let's make the wavelength even shorter. And you can see that they're much, much closer. As I increase the wavelength, see, it works in the opposite, right? On the way bottom, wow, this wave is going through space very slowly. It doesn't pack a lot of energy. But as I decrease the wavelength, you can see that it's going faster and faster. Now, obviously, I can play around with the wave speed, but that's really not, these are not the parameters that we care about. What we care about in this class is the wavelength. The longer the wavelength, the slower the wave moves, and it packs less energy. The shorter the wavelength, there's more energy. Okay, so as I mentioned, light is a form of electromagnetic radiation, and white light that you see that kind of emanates from the sun, it is a form of electromagnetic radiation, and if you put the light from the sun through a prism, this dissociates into a rain. You see this happening when there's rain coming, but there's also sun, so it's a combination. So the light that is shining down from the sun hits the droplets of water in the air, and those droplets of water act as a prism. And then what it does, it kind of divides the light into its various components, which we call the light spectrum. Now, as I mentioned, there are different types of electromagnetic radiation, and this is the entire spectrum of electromagnetic radiation. We have really long waves that don't pack a lot of energy, like radio waves. And on the other side, we have really powerful electromagnetic radiation, which are twitching really, really fast, like gamma rays and X-rays, which can be quite harmful because of the high amount of energy that they carry, and they can actually harm your DNA. So looking further into the light spectrum, now we're only looking at visible light. Visible light itself contains electromagnetic radiation of different amounts of energy associated with it. And you can see from red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. The further closer we get to the red side, there's less energy, longer wavelength, and the further closer we get to violet, the wavelengths are shorter and there's more energy packed into this part of the light spectrum. Now, how do plants capture the energy of light? They have molecules that are pigments. Now, it is the property of pigments to capture the energy of light, but pigments don't capture all of the types of parts of the light spectrum. They only capture parts of it. So, for example, chlorophyll A, which is shown by this solid line, chlorophyll A captures on the two ends of the light spectrum, the blue part and also the red part, but it doesn't capture the green section of the light spectrum. That's why chlorophyll is green. It's green because the reason is because it is capturing the light on these two ends of the spectrum. It's preventing our eyes from seeing these colors, but it's allowing us to see this color. Chlorophyll B is also another type of chlorophyll that is in plants, which has a similar absorption spectrum. And then we have beta carotene, which you can see in carrots, things that are orange. They actually absorb the green and blue part of the spectrum, but they don't absorb the red-orange part. That's why carrots are orange and red, because they absorb the green-blue section of the spectrum, but they allow the red-green to pass. So if, for example, if you're wearing a yellow shirt. In your shirt, there are pigments that do not absorb the yellow part, but it absorbs the other parts of the light spectrum. So you can see, your eyes can see a color that the material does not absorb. So that is how these chlorophyll molecules allow plants to capture the energy of light, because and that's the reason plants are green, because these molecules, chlorophyll A and B, do not absorb the green part of the spectrum, but they absorb the two ends of the spectrum. And that's why plants are green. Okay, so we're gonna address a question. Red algae are found in relatively deep water. In order for light to penetrate to these depths, it must be high in energy. So the light has to have a lot of energy in order to be able to penetrate down into that deep portions of the water. Which wavelengths of light would you expect red algae to absorb? Red, yellow, green, blue. Now, there might be a tendency, a kind of a slip of the mind to be tempted to choose red because these are red algae. But remember, our eyes see parts of the light spectrum that are not absorbed, right? So this red algae do not absorb the red section of the blue light. So this is not the correct answer. The wavelength of light that is required is something that is strong enough that it can penetrate deep down into the ocean. So let's go back, look at the spectrum. Which end of the spectrum has more energy? Is it red, yellow, green, blue? What are our choices? Red, yellow, green, blue. Which one has the highest energy? It's blue. So blue is the answer.